Greetings, Captains! I am Yusril, and welcome to something a little different. How to build an escort on next to no budget. This video is intended for newly promoted Rear and Vice Admirals, welcome to flag rank by the way, as well as anyone else who realises that they'd like an escort as an alternative ship in the endgame, but don't have much in the way of resources to throw at the problem. The rules are pretty simple. No Zen purchases are permitted. Dilithium purchases and random drops are strictly as alternatives, dilithium being expensive and random drops being, well, random. Energy credit expenditure is to be kept to a minimum. The aim is to produce an escort that will perform acceptably in STFs and other high-end content, and that will provide a solid base for further upgrades. We'll start with the base hull. In this case it's a mirror patrol escort. These are currently going for about 100 to 130,000 credits on the exchange. If you're a newly promoted Rear Admiral, then your free ship token could be used to get you a standard patrol escort, which has the same layout but different looks. The advanced escort is also available. The mirror version costs about 130,000 energy credits on the exchange, and it swaps an engineering console slot and ensign station for the science equivalents. With the hull sorted, the next line on the shopping list is, of course, weaponry. We're off to the Romulans to begin with. Project Nightingale includes a dual heavy plasma cannon with 2 accuracy mods as a reward, so we'll have 3 of those for starters. Unfortunately, mission replays have a 30-minute cooldown between finishing the mission and being able to get it again, so if you're looking to get this build done as fast as possible, run Nightingale and then start getting something else while you're waiting for it to become available. The something else in this case being the aft weaponry and the 4th forward weapon. For the 4th forward weapon we've gone for the traditional option, a torpedo tube which will offer some variety in damage type, lower power drain and a decently heavy punch. The downside is that of the major damage dealers, quantum, photon and plasma torpedoes, there isn't too much available by way of mission rewards. You can get photon and quantum tubes as rewards from diplomatic orders. They only have the 1 accuracy modifier, but they're pretty decent until upgrades become available. Quantum tubes tend to do slightly better than photons once you factor in bridge officer abilities and real-world conditions, so that's what I've gone for here. If plasma is more your thing, then, wait for it, Project Nightingale gives a double accuracy plasma torp, and if you're heartily sick of Serini Prime, then cutting the cord rewards a plasma torpedo with crit chance and crit severity bonuses. You'll lose some damage in the normal firing mode, but you'll get slightly better results in high yield fire. The big problem with aft weaponry, however, is that Federation missions don't give out any good turrets, at all. In fact, the only turret reward that I could find comes from the Undying, a plasma turret with a single damage boost. While the matchup of weapon type is handy, damage modifiers are pretty much the weakest weapon boost available in space. Fortunately, uncommon grade plasma turrets are pretty cheap. They're usually less than 10,000 energy credits each on the exchange, so it might be worth shopping around and seeing if you can find something with an accuracy modifier or even a couple of cheap rares. Get 2 turrets however you do it. For the 3rd slot, we're back to the missions. Specifically, we're back to Out in the Cold, another mission from the Breen arc. This has 3 rewards, all of which are pretty good in the slot. The cluster torpedo deploys a mini minefield that packs a fairly decent wallop, and you also have tricobalt mines or torpedoes. While the double damage modifier still takes a backseat to crit severity and crit chance, accuracy isn't an issue with tricobalt weapons. If the bomb gets to the target, it will hit it, and everything else within about 2 kilometers. Something a bit more creative comes from cutting the cord. Tractor beam mines, which are handy for pinning nippy opponents in place after the first pass. Fighters and the currently bugged Borg spheres and Klingon cruisers are an excellent example. Just as a note, I've gone for relatively slow firing weapons in this aft slot because, in theory, most of the time I will have my front guns pointed towards the enemy and I just won't have a firing solution for the aft weaponry, so it doesn't much matter if it's on a slow cooldown. When you start upgrading, you might consider getting the Omega Cutting Beam. That's got a 360-degree arc, so hey, not a problem. Alternately, of course, you can go for a third turret, but personally, I prefer the variety, and it's nice to be able to leave a tricobalt bomb or a transphasic minefield behind, just as a, going away present. Anyway, with weaponry sorted, the next problem is going to be getting around. There are some very nice impulse drives available. It's a choice between the Jem'Hadar combat impulse engines from Operation Gamma and the efficient impulse engines from Past Imperfect. The Jem'Hadar engines add 2.5 weapon power, plus an efficiency bonus, but since escorts run high weapon power, that won't make a difference. The efficient engines, however, boost weapons, shields and auxiliary by up to 3 power depending on the power setting. The lower the power setting, and remember that you can go as low as 15 base power with Legacy of Romulus, the better the bonus you get. On a typical attack setting of 100 weapon power, 50 shields, 25 engines and 25 auxiliary, that will get you 1.25 shield power and 2.5 auxiliary. The Jem'Hadar engines are perhaps better for pure damage, but if you can get to 125 weapon power any other way, or if you don't mind trading off a little damage for flexibility and durability, then the impulse engines have a slight edge. Warp propulsion, however, is a very different story. There's only actually one core on offer through missions. That's a field stabilizing core, which will give you some bonus shield power that also boosts your driver coil speed and slipstream speed. If you want this core, get into Friend of My Enemy in the Romulan arc, Spin the Wheel in the Davidians, the Kuvamach if you fancy Klingons, and Seeds of Dissent if you want to go kill some Cardassians instead. Thing is, there isn't much else on offer. Of the various missions, Spin the Wheel's the easiest and probably quickest, but if you want a different core, for example if you want a hyper-injection core to get yourself some more engine power, then your options are limited. Either hope for a random drop, shop around on the exchange, or blow about 30,000 dilithium on a Mark X rare. For the purposes of cheap, which is after all the whole point of this video, I'm going to go with the mission reward core. Moving on to the deflector, we're going to go for something to boost survivability a bit. Deflectors are typically about science powers, and there's not going to be much mileage had from those on this design. The Positron Deflector line's a good starting place. We're off to face the Borg this time. The mission is Assimilation in the Undine arc, which gives a rather nice Positron Deflector that will boost shield healing, as well as both shield and hull health. You get a little bonus to pushback attacks, but that's almost a sideline. Speaking of shields, most of the set options aren't available on our pretty much non-existent budget, so I'm going to go for an old favourite, a covariant array with a lot of capacity boosts. There are two options here. Either get the paratrinic array that drops from Past Imperfect, yep, you get to save the Enterprise twice while you're building this ship, or if you want a little more regeneration and a bit of variety in enemies, then you can get a covariant array with 2 capacity bonuses from By Any Means, The Other Side or Skirmish. Finally, at least as far as the ship is concerned, we have the consoles. Since plasma infusers aren't available from Federation missions, the low-budget tactical option is the pre-fire chamber, which you can get from A Light in the Dark and Suspect, or just dirt cheap on the exchange. They're nowhere near as good as the weapon-specific consoles, which is why they're dirt cheap, and once you start getting the resources to upgrade, the first things I would suggest replacing are these consoles. If you're sticking with plasma weaponry, get yourself some plasma infusers instead. Either way, you want 4 of these. For engineering consoles, I've taken neutronium alloy, which is available from A Light in the Dark, as a generic protect against everything console, along with an EPS flow regulator to help with the switch back from full impulse, and electroceramic plating to boost plasma and tetrion damage, which will help. The Borg use plasma, the Tholians use tetrions. Those last 2 consoles aren't reliably available. They're not mission rewards, so you're looking at random drops or the exchange. Fortunately, both are extremely cheap on the exchange. Science consoles you can be a bit more free and easy with. The ideal option would be a field generator to boost overall shield capacity, but those don't drop emissions and they cost a fortune on the exchange if you don't want to plonk down the dilithium to get it from the store. So, as an alternative, I've slotted 2 emitter arrays to help with my shield healing abilities. Again, they're not mission available, but again, they're also very cheap on the exchange. In fact, they're often close to replicator cell prices. Just as important as the ship, however, are the bridge officers operating it. On the science sensing slot, I usually go for hazard emitters. This is a phenomenally useful skill. The main purpose is as a heal over time effect for the hull, but it's also one of the principal means of removing plasma fire from the ship, and when you're up against the Borg, that is a very handy ability to have. On the Leftenant side, I usually take transfer shield strength. Contrary to the name, this can be used on yourself, and it provides a good shield heal with some resistance, especially when you boost it with emergency power to shields or a battery. However, if you know who you're going up against, then there are some alternative powers to consider. If you're against the Tholians, then consider tractor repulsors. Polarized hull is quite handy against the Tholians and the Borg. They're both very fond of tractor beams, but if you're in an escort, it's mostly a backup to attack pattern Omega. And against the Borg spheres, particularly with their current turbo speed bug under emergency power to engines, a tractor beam will simply stop them dead and counter the whole problem. Science team is something I used to like, but I've gone cold of it of late. While it's a decent shield heal and has a few other side bonuses, it shares cooldowns with tactical and engineering teams, and having 3 or 4 abilities tripping over each other at once isn't really a good idea. For an engineering ensign, there are 5 choices. Engineering Team 1, which is a decent hull heal and also cleans viral matrix from the target ship, as well as the 4 emergency power rank 1 abilities. These boost power to the appropriate system, surprise, but they also repair it if it's offline, so emergency power to weapons if you're against the Tholians is very handy, and they will add a slight boost to the system in question. Shields will get a small heal, weapons get a damage boost for a few seconds, engines get a speed bonus, and auxiliary gives you various small buffs to science skills. The real advantage comes, however, when you mix emergency power and then use that to bootstrap another ability. So, for example, emergency power to weapons, and then feed that into cannon rapid fire or scattered volley just as you go into an attack run. We've got 2 ensign slots available here, so engineering team can go in one, and either emergency power to shields or weapons in the other. For the engineering lieutenant, there's a few choices here. Reverse shield polarity is a good panic button if your shields are going, or they've just gone, and there's still more pain incoming, but it does have a long cooldown. I should emphasise that it is not a solution to your problems, it's giving you 6 seconds to find a solution to your problems, which will often be getting out of range. Auxiliary power to the battery boosts weapons, engines and shields for a few seconds at the cost of taking auxiliary power offline. If you think of it as a broad spectrum emergency power ability, then you'll have a pretty good idea of what's going on. Like the emergency power abilities, it does need to be mixed with other powers to get the best results. Auxiliary to structural, by contrast, is a semi-decent hull heal that also adds a bit of damage resistance to the ship, but it's held back by relatively low auxiliary power when it's in an escort. Despite that, it's my usual choice, since it's got a fairly fast cooldown, and if engineering team and hazard emitters are both unavailable, it doesn't hurt to have a third option that you can cycle relatively quickly to take the edge off the damage. Extend shields needs to be mixed with emergency power to shields and transfer shields for best results. It's a mirror of transfer shields. It gives a low shield heal but a high resistance boost. However, it cannot be used on yourself. It can only be used on an ally, which means it tends to find its place in support builds. Escorts do not really do support builds. Escorts are about damaging the enemy, so as a consequence I tend not to take this. Directed energy modulation is a bit of a dark horse. It improves shield penetration, but with an escort the whole idea is to do so much damage that you just batter the enemy shields down in the opening couple of volleys, which then renders modulation a little bit pointless. Cruisers and science vessels get decent mileage from this, escorts not quite so much. And as for boarding party, well, the principal use of this skill is to get your chief medical officer angrily demanding to know if you're out of your Vulcan mind. It straps a few dozen of your crew into 3 unshielded, slow shuttlecraft, points them at the enemy, and then says, hey guys, assuming you don't die, try and do a bit of damage to their internal systems and then beam back. Needless to say, they don't usually even get to the target ship. It's not even as though the enemy are usually aiming at them. Random fire at will and scatter volley tends to just take them out. That's before tactical teams transfer shield strength with a duty officer proc. There is actually one that will just beam them straight into space, and are generally useless against the Borg. On the tactical side, tactical team is so useful as to be almost compulsory in an ensign slot. It automatically rebalances shields when they take fire, it clears boarding parties, of which the Borg and the Klingons are very fond, and it boosts starship damage for 10 seconds. The only downside is a mutual 15-second lockout with your science and engineering teams, something about Union rules. The second ensign slot is often another tactical team to allow you to keep the effects rolling, but depending on your 4th weapon slot, it can either be High Yield 1 to give a torpedo tube a bit of extra punch at the right moment, or if you equipped a dual beamback, you can consider Fire at Will 1 to give yourself some area damage, or the quick destruction of the USS Titan. In the Lieutenant slots, we're going for Cannon Scatter Volley and Cannon Rapid Fire. These are the cone and single attacks respectively for the main forward cannons, as well as the turrets, and they are basic bread and butter damage abilities. Chances are when you're flying the ship you will always have at least one of these on cooldown in combat. The Lieutenant Commander slots are where the fun stuff starts. We have 2 slots to play with. Attack Pattern Beta 2 can be used to debuff the damage resistance of your target for a short, about 5 seconds duration, every time you hit them. So not only do your follow-up shots do more damage, but everyone else on the team gets to enjoy the bonus as well, so even the science vessels get to put some hurt down. The second Lieutenant Commander slot depends on what weapon you have in the 4th forward slot. If you lucked out on bridge officers, and you have beam target, shields or weapons 3, even overload 3 in a pinch, and you have a dual beam bank fitted, incidentally dual plasma beam bank, double accuracy modifier, you guessed it, Project Nightingale, then this is where that power will go. If instead you're running the cheap build that we've got here, then go for Torpedo Spread 3. This can be had from the Jem'Hadar Bridge Officer rewarded by Facility 4028, and it gives the torpedo tube a very nice cone attack to help deal with swarms of little targets. If you've got a Tricobalt torpedo in your aft slot, then it will also work on this, but it's worth noting that it does not affect the Breen Transphasic torpedo. For the Commander slot, only Attack Pattern Omega 2 is easily available, which is handy because Attack Pattern Omega is an extremely useful skill. It gives a significant damage boost, and more importantly, it breaks the ship free of any movement impairing effects, such as the tractor beams of which the Borg and Tholians are so fond of, warp plasma, and similar nuisances, for want of a polite term. It'll only do this for a few seconds though, so if you do get tractored, don't stay within 5 kilometers of whatever's doing the tractoring once you pop this. If Attack Pattern Omega 3 becomes available, then grab it. It should be fairly cheap, it's quite a common upgrade for a bridge officer, but it's not a massive priority compared to, say, getting the plasma infusers installed. Last, and for our purposes least, we have the duty officers. These are almost completely random, so the only thing I can really advise you to do is just snag anything that looks useful. One officer that does stand out, however, is Law. He's obtained from a Fistful of Gorn, and is a very rare grade projectile duty officer who can shorten the reload time on a torpedo tube. It's a random proc every time you fire a torpedo. He's definitely worth having, and incidentally, if you've wondered how certain players seem able to just spam torpedoes, chances are that they've got Law and a couple of his colleagues equipped. At least that's how it's usually done. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is that. We have a ship, we have a loadout, and we have a command crew for close to no expenditure. Indeed, with the loot drops from all the missions you'll have run, there's a distinct chance that you'll actually turn a profit on the whole affair. All they need now is a captain. I'll see you in space.